What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about Bitcoin versus gold, which has been increasingly becoming a huge debate. It's almost like saying, which is the better superhero, Superman or Batman? Speaking of Superman, do you know why he doesn't like trading Bitcoin after 7 p.m.? The answer? Because it's kryptonite. Did you get it? Crypto night? All right, anyway, all jokes aside, today I wanted to talk about the differences between Bitcoin and gold, especially with the current run-up that Bitcoin has been having since March of 2020. It's almost 6 to 7 times its original price. Institutions like JP Morgan even believe that Bitcoin could actually rise to above $146,000 per coin long-term as it starts to compete with gold as an alternative asset. So today's video will be divided into 4 parts. In part 1, I'm going to quickly give you an overview of Bitcoin and gold. In part 2, I'm going to go over what a safe haven asset is. Number 3, I'm going to talk about the similarities and differences in Bitcoin and gold when it comes to this context. And lastly, we're going to talk about if you should buy Bitcoin and gold and what you should consider. By the end of this video, it's my goal that you'll be able to make a more informed decision when deciding between these two assets, Bitcoin or gold. But before we get started, only a small percentage of my viewers are actually subscribed to my channel, so if you end up enjoying this content, make sure to subscribe. It's free and you can always change your mind. So first, let's talk about what Bitcoin and gold are, and I'm just gonna give you a really quick overview. If you guys watched my prior video on Bitcoin, we know that Bitcoin is actually a decentralized digital currency that runs on a network. But what does that mean? Bitcoin allows transactions to happen without a financial intermediary such as a bank. Currently, the way a transaction works is that, let's say you pay a friend and his name is Jeff. If you give him $100 via Zelle, his bank is actually gonna give him $100 and his bank will talk to your bank and make sure that you actually have those funds to transfer over. That's typically how a financial transaction works these days, is that the banks talk to each other on the back end, making sure that you have $100 in your account to actually transfer over and that his account, Jeff's account, actually receives $100. With Bitcoin, there is no intermediary. Every Bitcoin transaction is just checked and validated on the Bitcoin network. So when you send $100 to Jeff, it's of public record and it can be validated by anyone on the Bitcoin network. Since there's no single point of failure, the system is entirely impossible to shut down and it's hard to manipulate or even make adjustments to the Bitcoin network. Think of it as like a really large neighborhood watch. Everyone knows what's going on the entire network, so every single transaction is validated and everyone kind of keeps an eye out for each other. In that way, the currency itself is very transparent and can stay very safe because everything is logged really properly. Transparency and safety is actually one of the core tenets of being a safe haven asset, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. So that's Bitcoin, but as for gold, we all know what gold is, but there is a very good reason as to why it's a really good store of value and a good safe haven asset. Gold is valuable on its own. It's a finite resource. It can't be manufactured out of thin air, and all of these properties make it a good safe haven asset. Okay, so since gold is a finite resource, the purchasing power of gold is going to stay relevant over time. And this kind of makes sense, right? Governments can always print more money. So as more money gets printed, then the overall value of the existing dollar is going to slightly go lower over time. The price that you're willing to pay for gold is going to be higher as there's more money in circulation. And as of right now, the government is pumping a lot of money into the economy with each of their stimulus bills. In addition, gold really has no correlations with the stock market or currencies, which makes it a really valid safe haven asset, especially when the market is volatile. People are going to want to flock towards assets like gold. So let's actually go over the definition of a safe haven asset because it's going to give us a lot of context when comparing the similarities and differences between Bitcoin and gold. So according to Investopedia, a safe haven is an investment that is expected to retain or increase in value during times of market turbulence. Safe havens are sought by investors to limit their exposure to losses in the event of market downturns. So what actually constitutes a good store of value or a safe haven asset? I think there are 5 or 6 criteria that we should be looking at. The first is that it needs to be transparent and safe. Second, I believe that it has to be durable. It can't be destroyed or decay. In the case of gold, it can't be destroyed, which is a good thing. Third, it needs to be scarce. So you can't just print more out of it out of thin air because that kind of defeats the purpose of a safe haven asset. And number 4, I think that it needs to be liquid so that you can get your cash in and out of it whenever you please. Fifth, it needs to be stable in terms of its price and its volatility, and we will be talking about that in relation to Bitcoin pretty soon here. Lastly, I would prefer a safe haven asset to have some sort of value to it, some underlying value. So gold, for example, can be used in jewelry, electronics, and semiconductors. Okay, so with that being said, those are basically some of the criteria that we need to look at when considering if Bitcoin or gold is a good safe haven asset. So now it's time to actually compare the two. In terms of transparency and having safety, I think Bitcoin is up there because each Bitcoin transaction is validated on the network, as well as having a lot of safety because each Bitcoin is encrypted, it's decentralized, and it's pretty much impossible to duplicate a Bitcoin. Gold also has an established system for trading. It's been ironed out over hundreds of years, and tracking of it is pretty much on point as well. It's stored mostly in vaults these days and has been known as a safe haven asset for years. In terms of durability, both Bitcoin and gold are pretty much hard to destroy. Bitcoin's a digital currency and gold has a hard time being corroded, and even if you set fire to it, it just melts. It doesn't really get destroyed. In terms of scarcity, with Bitcoin, there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be created, and right now we've mined about 18.5 million of that. With gold, we know that 197,000 tons have been mined throughout history, and there really isn't that much gold left. In fact, it's a finite resource that's a limited resource on Earth. In terms of a liquid market, basically how easy it is to get cash in and out of these assets, I would say gold has been already established, so it's pretty easy to get your money out. With Bitcoin, I would have said 5 years ago, it's actually pretty illiquid. It was hard to get your money into Bitcoin and hard to get your money out of Bitcoin. But these days, it's increasingly easier to buy and sell Bitcoin, especially with a lot of the newer institutions that are starting to adopt it. We have a lot easier exchanges to use, such as Coinbase, where we can get our money in and out of these digital currencies. Now, let's talk about price stability, because this is kind of an interesting point for both of these assets. We know that Bitcoin's price stability is not stable at all. I mean, it's very volatile. Back in March of 2020, it was trading for about 4.9K, and today it's trading at 6 or 7 times that, which is pretty crazy. We've also seen the reverse, which is, for example, back in 2018, coins used to be around 17,000 per Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden that price crashed from 17,000 all the way to 3,000. So the swings on Bitcoin are huge, and so the price volatility of Bitcoin actually makes it not such an attractive safe haven asset. Gold, on the other hand, has its ups and downs, but is more stable overall than Bitcoin itself. In terms of utility value, Bitcoin's underlying technology allows people to send money across countries without any transaction fees. It has a lot of potential for banking, especially in underdeveloped countries, and in terms of that is pretty great. With gold, we know that it has some underlying utility value in terms of jewelry, electronics, and semiconductors. It'll always carry some type of value there because it is a precious metal. So in terms of those criteria to look at when it comes to safe haven assets, we can see that both Bitcoin and gold fit the bill pretty well, except for Bitcoin is a little bit more volatile in terms of price, which could drive some investors away from that being their safe haven. With that being said, should you buy gold or Bitcoin just as a store of value or a safe haven asset in general? With Bitcoin, it's really tough to say. I had 5% of my portfolio back in March of 2020 dedicated to just speculative investments, and I put some money into Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I've just been kind of just holding on to that, and it's done pretty well for me recently, but my plan is just to hold on to it and see what happens. In my initial Bitcoin video where I explained what Bitcoin is, I said that as a long-term investor, you should probably look at Bitcoin as a speculative investment and put about 3 to 5% of your total portfolio invested in Bitcoin if you wanted to. I'm still sticking by that view today. Basically, if you believe in the store of value that Bitcoin has, you might be able to put a little bit more money into it, but at the end of the day, I kind of look at Bitcoin as a way to diversify your portfolio. So 3 to 5% of your portfolio in something like Bitcoin is plenty enough. Just know that right now the news surrounding Bitcoin is super hyped up, and there's almost like a shark feeding frenzy, buying frenzy around Bitcoin that is pretty crazy. Who knows what the price of Bitcoin will be in the future, but if you are holding it for 34 years, we do know that more and more people are probably going to look at Bitcoin as a safe haven asset. In my opinion, a lot of people and institutions right now are just putting a lot of their cash anywhere where they can actually get some return on their money, especially because the value of cash seems to be dwindling down with all the stimulus bills that are going into effect. So let's talk about gold. I personally never viewed it as such an amazing investment. Obviously, it's a really good hedge against inflation, and a lot of people flee to it, especially during a market correction or a market recession. I think the best time to actually invest in gold is when the market is a little bit shaky. It's known as a good safe haven asset, and as such, it tends to appreciate during those times. In general, I view gold as a diversifying investment. It's somewhat good to hold. I mean, even Warren Buffett kind of goes back and forth on his opinion of gold. One of his opinions of gold, which I personally align with, is when he said, It's a lot better to have a goose that keeps laying eggs than a goose that just sits there and eats insurance and storage and a few things like that. Essentially what Warren is saying is that gold doesn't really have any dividends or interest. It just kind of sits there and it really relies on supply and demand for the price of it to go up. I would say one of the counters to that quote in the case of Bitcoin is that Bitcoin doesn't need inventory space. It's all stored digitally. So right now I believe the price of gold is going up just because of how much extra money is being pumped into the economy, similar with Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. So obviously if you do have some extra money to invest in gold or Bitcoin or any other type of alternative asset, now would be the time to do so. Obviously, if you guys have some extra money laying around and you want to invest it in some sort of safe haven asset, by all means, you are welcome to do so. I would definitely encourage you to do your own research when it comes to that. If you have more pressing issues at hand, like debt, paying your rent, paying your mortgage, paying a car off, I would probably prioritize those first and build your financial foundation before investing in something like Bitcoin or gold. Know that each of these assets comes with its pros and cons, and when you're adding it to your portfolio, look at it as a diversifying investment. I would say Bitcoin itself is becoming more and more accepted as a store of value, especially as institutions start to accept it. And so if you put a gun to my head today and asked me to choose between Bitcoin and gold, I would probably just say Bitcoin, like many other millennials out there. In fact, 67% of millennials actually surveyed preferred Bitcoin over gold, which is actually pretty interesting. With all this being said as well, you don't even have to buy either. You can just not even invest into Bitcoin and gold and you will still be fine. Anyways, guys, I hope that you learned something from this video. If you did, make sure to drop it a like, subscribe to my channel for more videos from me in the future, and also tick the notification bell. If you'd like a free stock from Robinhood when you deposit any amount, it could even just be $1, make sure to click the link in my description below for that. Lastly, thanks to all my Patreon supporters. I appreciate you guys being here. I will see you guys in the next video, which will be next week. All right, peace.